She asked the same question over and over, until Karoline had enough. What happened next stunned the entire room. The air in the press briefing room was thick with tension. Reporters packed the space, cameras lined the back wall, and every lens was pointed at the podium where Karoline Leavitt stood. She had been through tough press conferences before, but today felt different. There was an energy in the room, a quiet storm building just beneath the surface. She could feel it. A journalist in the front row was pushing, interrupting, refusing to back down. Karoline stayed composed, but something was about to break. This wasn't just another press briefing. This was about to be a viral moment. If you're ready to hear this powerful story, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment where you're watching from. The room was packed, every seat filled with reporters eager to get their questions in. A row of cameras lined the back wall, their red lights blinking, recording every second. The air was heavy, not just with heat from the packed bodies, but with something unspoken, a tension that everyone could feel. This wasn't just another press conference. It was bigger than that. Everyone knew it. Karoline Leavitt stepped up to the podium, standing tall, shoulders squared. She had done this 100 times before. No hesitation, no nerves, just another day in a job that demanded control. The room quieted as she adjusted the microphone. She scanned the crowd, reading the faces, already knowing who would be friendly and who would push. Hands shot up instantly. The first few questions came from familiar voices, routine topics, policy updates, economic numbers, the usual dance between government and the press. Karoline answered each one with ease, her tone steady, her words precise. Everything was moving smoothly, just as it should. But then, in the front row, a reporter leaned forward slightly, gripping her pen, waiting for the right moment to strike. Karoline saw it, and she knew this press conference was about to take a turn. Near the front row, a reporter sat forward in her chair, her pen tapping lightly against her notepad. She wasn't just waiting for her turn. She was waiting for an opening. Her eyes stayed locked on Karoline, watching, calculating. She wasn't here for routine questions or polite back and forth. She was here to push, to challenge, to make a moment. The press conference was moving along smoothly when she cut through the noise. "Ms. Leavitt, let's talk about the real issue here." Her voice was sharp, carrying over the others. The room quieted slightly, a few reporters glancing at each other. The shift was subtle, but Karoline felt it. She stayed composed, giving a small nod. "Go ahead." The reporter wasted no time. "Do you think the administration's policies are designed to silence certain communities? Because the data suggests." Karoline lifted a hand, keeping her tone steady. "I've answered that before. Our policies are designed to benefit all Americans, regardless of background. If you have a question related to today's topic, I'm happy to continue." Murmurs rippled through the room, but the reporter wasn't finished. She leaned in, tilting her head slightly. "You didn't actually answer the question, though." Karoline held her ground. This was the game, and she wasn't about to play into it. The tension in the room thickened. The reporter didn't back down. She wasn't satisfied with Karoline's answer, because she wasn't looking for an answer. She wanted a reaction. "You didn't actually answer the question," she pressed, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. Karoline kept her expression steady. No frustration, no impatience. Just control. "I already addressed that," she said, her tone firm but measured. "Let's move on." A few reporters shifted in their seats, exchanging quick glances. Some scribbled notes, already sensing this was turning into something bigger. Others simply watched, waiting to see what would happen next. The air felt heavier now, charged. But the reporter wasn't done. She leaned forward slightly, eyes locked onto Karoline. "So you're refusing to answer?" The temperature in the room seemed to rise a degree. Karoline didn't move. She had been through these kinds of exchanges before. She knew exactly what this was, an attempt to put her on the defensive, to turn a standard press briefing into a spectacle. "I'm here to answer serious questions," Karoline said, keeping her voice level. "If you have one, I'll be happy to respond. Otherwise, we're moving on." A brief pause, just long enough for everyone in the room to register what was happening. The balance of control was shifting. But the reporter wasn't finished. She tilted her head, her smirk barely visible. Why is it so hard for you to give a straight answer? Karoline's grip on the podium tightened for a brief second. She let out a slow breath. She wasn't going to let this turn into a back and forth for the cameras. She straightened. I don't believe in wasting time. If you have a new question, ask it. If not, I'd like to give others a chance. A flicker of amusement crossed the reporter's face. She knew exactly what she was doing, and she knew the cameras were catching every second. A few quiet murmurs spread through the crowd. Some reporters were getting impatient, others intrigued. They could all feel it now. This wasn't just a press conference anymore. It was turning into something much bigger. If this story is touching your heart right now, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment below. The room fell into silence. The kind that wasn't just quiet, it was waiting. Every eye was locked on Karoline and the reporter, the tension thick enough to feel. No one shuffled their papers. No one cleared their throat. The air barely moved. The reporter smirked, leaning in just slightly, like a predator sensing weakness. She wasn't here for answers. She was here for a moment. Her moment. Why is it so hard for you to give a straight answer? She asked again, her voice slow, deliberate. Karoline exhaled through her nose. She had been patient. She had given the same answer more than once. And yet, here they were. Her expression didn't change, but the shift in her posture said everything. I don't believe in wasting anyone's time, she said, her voice cutting clean through the air. If you have a relevant question, ask it. If not, I'm moving on. A flicker of something passed over the reporter's face. Not frustration, satisfaction. This was what she had wanted. She had gotten Karoline to the edge. Now, she just had to push. The smirk returned, but this time it was different. This wasn't amusement. This was victory. So that's no comment, she said, tilting her head slightly. Are you afraid of transparency? Gasps rippled through the room. A few reporters murmured under their breath. This was no longer a press conference. This was a standoff. Karoline's jaw tightened for just a second. Not much. Just enough for those paying attention to notice. Enough for the cameras to catch. She had a choice. Engage and let this moment spiral into chaos. Or end it. She glanced toward the side of the room. A subtle movement. Barely noticeable. But security caught it. They understood. The moment shifted instantly. Reporters in the front row sat up straighter. Others pressed their lips together, sensing what was coming next. Some exchanged looks, as if silently asking, is this really happening? The reporter saw it too. Her smirk twitched, just for a second. She had played this game before, but now she was realizing. So had Karoline. The reporter's smirk faded as she realized what was happening. The shift in Karoline's gaze, the slight movement from security. It was all the confirmation she needed. She had pushed too far, and now the moment was slipping out of her hands. Still, she wasn't going to leave without a final word. She let out a short laugh, shaking her head just enough for the cameras to catch. Then, with just the right amount of drama, she said, "So much for freedom of the press, huh?" Karoline didn't react. No eye roll, no sigh, nothing that could be clipped into a headline. She simply stood her ground, her expression unreadable. Security took a step forward. They didn't need to say anything. The message was clear. The reporter lingered for a moment, as if considering making a bigger scene. But then, with a calculated sigh, she grabbed her notepad and stood. Even as she walked toward the exit, she carried herself like she was the one in control, like this was exactly what she wanted. The door shut behind her. The silence that followed was thick. No one moved. No one spoke. Then, a voice from the back of the room. Hesitant, but firm. Do you think this was the right decision? Karoline didn't hesitate. I think it was necessary. And just like that, the press conference continued. But everyone in that room knew this moment would be everywhere within minutes. The reporter sat still for just a moment, as if debating her next move. She wasn't going to fight security. She knew better than that. But she wasn't going to leave quietly either. With a small shake of her head and a dramatic sigh, she muttered, "So much for freedom of the press." Huh? Just loud enough for the cameras to catch. Karoline didn't react. No eye roll, no deep breath, nothing that could be clipped and spun into outrage. She simply watched as security took a slow step forward, making it clear that the conversation was over. With no other option, the reporter grabbed her notepad and stood. But even in defeat, she carried herself like she had won. As she walked toward the exit, she moved deliberately, like she wanted every camera to capture the moment. She paused at the door, almost as if waiting for Karoline to say something, to slip up. But Karoline stayed silent. Then, click. The door shut behind her. The room stayed frozen for a moment. No one spoke. The energy had shifted, but no one was sure what to do next. Some reporters kept their eyes down, pretending to take notes. Others just stared. Finally, a voice from the back, hesitant but firm. "Do you think this was the right decision?" Karoline didn't hesitate. She met the journalist's eyes and answered simply, "I think it was necessary." The press conference had barely ended when the storm began. Within minutes, clips of the confrontation flooded social media. One video, cut right at the moment security moved in, had already racked up thousands of views. The hashtag silencing the press was trending, spreading like wildfire across platforms. Everyone had an opinion, and the internet was choosing sides. Headlines popped up almost instantly. Some outlets framed it as a necessary move to maintain order. Others ran with a more dramatic angle. Karoline Leavitt shuts down press freedom in stunning exchange. The divide was clear. Conservative voices praised her for handling an unprofessional disruption. Mainstream media, they were already spinning the narrative. The reporter wasted no time. She was already on air, seated across from a sympathetic anchor, brows furrowed in just the right amount of righteous frustration. "I was simply asking tough but necessary questions," she said, shaking her head. "And instead of answering, I was removed. That should concern everyone." The anchor nodded along, serious, concerned. The framing was clear. She wasn't just a journalist. She was a victim. Back inside the building, Karoline's aides rushed into her office, one of them gripping a phone. "It's already everywhere," she said breathlessly. "The networks are running it on repeat." Another aide swiped through Twitter. "She's leaning into it hard, calling it a chilling moment for press freedom." Karoline barely blinked. She had expected this. Meanwhile, conservative media was rallying behind her. Headlines on their side painted a different picture. "Leavitt stands her ground against grandstanding reporter." Talk show hosts played the full clip, pointing out how the reporter had ignored multiple warnings before security stepped in. "This wasn't about journalism," one commentator said. "This was a performance." But Karoline knew how these things worked. Facts wouldn't matter to the people who had already decided what they wanted to believe. The question wasn't whether she was right or wrong. It was who controlled the narrative. And right now, the battle for that was just beginning. Karoline didn't panic. She had seen this play out before: outrage, headlines, social media taking sides. She knew better than to get dragged into a back and forth. Instead, she made her next move carefully. She turned to her team. "Release the full video," she said. "No edits. No commentary. Just let people see exactly what happened." Within minutes, the footage was uploaded. The title was simple and direct: "Watch for yourself." The full exchange between Karoline Leavitt and reporter. No dramatic captions, no spin, just the raw moment from start to finish. The response was immediate. Supporters called it a brilliant move, praising her for letting the truth speak for itself. The video showed exactly how many times she had answered the reporter before security stepped in. "This wasn't silencing the press," one commentator said. "This was shutting down a circus." But as expected, critics weren't backing down. Some refused to acknowledge the full footage, still pushing the narrative that Karoline had shut down free speech. Others claimed the video only made her look worse. Karoline wasn't surprised. She knew this wasn't just about facts. It was about perception. But at least now, anyone who wanted the truth could see it for themselves. Karoline knew this was never really about truth. It was about control. Who could shape the narrative first and loudest? It didn't matter how many times she had answered the question or how clear the full video was. Some people had already decided what they wanted to believe. Then, finally, a voice of reason. A veteran journalist, someone who had been in the industry long before social media dictated the news cycle, spoke up during a panel discussion. This wasn't journalism. This was a performance. The room went quiet for a moment. No one wanted to admit it, but they knew he was right. The real question wasn't whether Karoline had handled it correctly. It was bigger than that. Are we being informed? Or are we just being entertained? Because that's what the news had become, a spectacle. And in an era where clicks mattered more than context, the line between truth and theater was disappearing. So now, the question is for you. What do you think? Let's hear it in the comments below. Also like and subscribe.